often our families are not perfect. Often there are unhealthy family dynamics. There are broken relationships. Not always, but sometimes. And someone might find themselves in a caretaking position with someone that maybe traumatized them in their youth, or they have a bad relationship. I can see how that could be very, very tough. I know that in one of my relationships, I often am in the caretaking role, and I find I'm having to kind of go, okay, Grace, just take a breath, just let it go in and don't react, just be calm, let it go, let it be. What advice do you have for people who are in kind of that tricky situation where they find themselves as a caretaker, they don't necessarily get along real well with that person? There's some boundary setting that needs to happen there.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Well, I have a lot to say, only because I may
good.
know a thing or two about that. I may be one of those people, without divulging too much,
Right.
but that carefully. I will say that we see a lot of caregivers, a lot of our participants are exactly in that position. We have participants of all kinds, so it becomes really hard in a group where we've got someone who holds someone with a lot of love and tenderness and it's just beloved relationships. And so that becomes very heavy and hard. And then we have the relationships you've described, which become very challenging. And yet we can hold space for each other.
Sure.
I am so respectful of those who do have those tender, caring relationships. Many of mine are fractured and difficult. And I think that for me, the way I look at those challenging relationships of care is just, and it took me, this is not something I learned overnight or just happened. It took me years of work to say the capacity of Kristi is finite. Now, my mindset is infinite.
My love may be infinite.
My love is complicated, but can be infinite. My positivity, my hope, my all of these things, infinite in my mindset. I have a very strong growth mindset, so I'm constantly learning from people. But my capacity is finite. So if we look at the capacity of Kristi, and I will say this to people I care for, the capacity for Kristi is here. Therefore, what you are asking for me, and let's just say you get a wedge and you get a wedge and you get a wedge, or whatever portion of my capacity, and that ebbs and flows from day to day, from week to week. But if you're asking for me more than I have to give, that's where I find that boundary, really being able to say, so you may need this week. That's outside of my capacity. I just don't have that to give. Yet, this is where the growth mindset comes in, I can offer this, but I can't offer all of me because there's all of me not to give. I just don't have that. So I have to look at my capacity. I have to be really clear about what are they asking of me? What do they need from me? And if it's outside that. We've come to a really hard place. My dad has lived with us for 17 years. And I've now been caring for him longer than he cared for me. And many would say it's an honor and privilege to care for our parents who once cared for us. If you've ever had a, childhood trauma story, that becomes complicated in that. And his needs have grown beyond what I can do for him.
Right.
And it's actually, the emotional trauma now is when's he going to fall again in my home?
Yes.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Yes.
So that living in fear for being gone for longer than XYZ, I had to come up with a plan in the interim until we could figure out what's next for him. And we found this really great resource where we have video monitoring. And I have friends who are video monitoring their dogs at doggy daycare or while they're away. And I'm like, I don't want to watch. So we found a company that could do the video monitoring and be the person watching and let me know if there's an emergency so that I can go away for longer than a few hours from my home. So looking at what is within my sphere of capacity, what their needs are. If it's really hard emotionally, and I've had family members who've said, I just can't do any more than what I'm doing now because it's just too hard.
And that's fair.
Completely fair. Completely fair.
That does not make you a failure or
in the least.
Yeah.
No.
It's
so then we have to come together and manage that resentment of the burden of responsibility that still comes with that.
Yeah.
But we work on that together, and we're still working on that together in support of parents, and just saying, oh, this has been enough. I have two sisters. We care for two parents. They're divorced. And looking at, we each play a different role for our parents in their support. And when we look at those different roles, being really clear in our communication. Our parents are neurotypical. We're very fortunate. So we're able to have those conversations which say, this is my role. And each of us have different capacity and ability to support them. Very different for each of them. And being okay with that. And being in communication about that. And not letting myself compare myself to the sister who can call every day.